In this lesson, I'm going to be talking about session hijacking and session based attack. The thing about HTTP is, even though it's a pretty good protocol for transmitting information back and forth between web server and client, it was never designed with application programming in mind. It was really just a way of sharing simple documents that had references to other documents built into them. That was really its initial design. And frankly, it was really about sharing laboratory research papers between scientists. That's kind of what was the original intent and purpose. It has really taken off to a far greater degree than probably Tim Berners-Lee ever had in mind when he first formulated the idea of HTTP and HTML. So, HTTP is not a stateful protocol. In other words, the HTTP server has no idea that I've been there before. It doesn't keep track of any sort of state involving me. So if I go to a web server and I issue a request and then I go back to issue another request, the server itself has no logic built into it to say, I recognize you. So as a result of that, web applications have needed to develop their own capability to do sessions to manage state. So a web application would generate a session ID for me and then keep track of that session ID. And if I were able to capture that session ID, I may be able to make use of it in order to hijack your session and use it for something. So for the example of shopping online, if you're going to a business online to do some shopping, and again, I'm going to pick on Amazon just because it's easy. I'm not suggesting at all that Amazon has any of these sorts of vulnerabilities at all. It's just if I say Amazon, people generally know that we're talking about web shopping. So let's say you go to Amazon and they generate a session for you because of this shopping activity that you're doing, and your session ID attaches you somehow to a shopping cart as well as an account identifier. If I were able to grab that session ID and make use of it, I would have your shopping cart as well as your account information potentially, and if there were no other protections in place, I may be able to place an order as you using your credit card information because Amazon does store that for you. Now, again, Amazon has far more protections in place than that, including typically requiring you to put your username and password back in. If you are doing something like making a purchase, you would have to log back in to make sure that you are really the person who owns that particular account. So sessions are there to maintain some sort of stateful relationship between the server and the client. And where you would find those session identifiers is in a place like this. So you can see here under the response in the bottom right of this window, it says set cookie NID equals 61 equals NUA HTHF. So that's really something like a session identifier. Even though it doesn't say session ID, that's something like a session identifier to identify me to this particular web server. In this case, it's actually Google. And the way that we store session identifiers is with a cookie. And a cookie is actually a piece of data that is stored on the client side that's generated by the server. And the server actually sends cookie requests to you to see whether you've got the cookie that it may have generated for you at some time in the past. And again, that's how it figures out who you are, because it stored a little piece of information on your system that it can use to identify you with down the road. So if you were to go to weather.com, for example, it may remember the different locations that you've looked at before, and that has to do with cookies that are stored on your system, and you would use that cookie to transmit the data back to the server in order to exchange information about who you are so that the server can give you a more personalized experience. It can make you feel like you're special and unique, and it stores information about you so that you don't have to go searching for it. It's really useful from a usability standpoint. Of course, from a privacy standpoint, that's another issue altogether. But cookies are used to store information on the client side. And again, that's really all about the fact that HTTP was never designed as a stateful protocol. So it's got no capability to do things like store information about you and maintain all of that data. That's all done with stuff that's outside of the HTTP protocol. And in this case, we're talking about cookies. So you can see here in this particular response from the server, it's doing a cookie set. And if it wanted information from me, there would be a get cookie, and I would be transmitting my cookie back to the server so that it can look up things about me, probably in a database somewhere. So session IDs are typically stored using a cookie, and that's how the application maintains a level of state, is with the session ID, where it can map things that you are doing to activities using this particular session ID. And the session ID is stored on your computer using a cookie. You can get extensions for your browsers, or you can get other applications that will allow you to look at all of the cookies on your system, or if you know where they're stored, you can go directly to the hard drive and take a look at them there. But it's not something you can look at directly inside the browser, although there was a time when you used to be able to see cookies from there. They've taken a lot of that functionality out, and now there are other ways to get access and manage your cookies. So that's session identifiers and sessions and cookies.